senior project, I got to do a number of things. I tried writing a book. So I will get to this, but this is my finished product. And so everything I did has been encapsulated in this. So at the beginning, when Eric Stratton assigned the senior projects, he said, well, you can do really whatever you want. Great, that doesn't really help. I'm used to having assignments. So I got to think outside of the box. Well, okay, what am I supposed to do? What do I want to do? Okay, I've always been interested in military since I was really young. So I've gone with my grandpa and father to the Miramar Air Show, growing up and airsofting, skeet shooting, just about all my life. So with that background, then, well, okay, I like World War II, and I'm used to having soldiers around in San Clemente. So what would it be like to be a World War II veteran? And something that got me thinking in this manner was the show Band of Brothers, which, for those of you that know, is a rather realistic show, and with a glimpse into what it would have been like to jump into Normandy the night before D-Day. So I had this goal in mind. Great, I'm going to meet one of those guys from Easy Company. Well, I ended up meeting one of them, but that was 2 weeks ago. So I wasn't able to have an interview with him just because of the time constraints, and I'm having trouble getting a hold of him. But I did get to meet a number of other veterans. But something that I learned was they were all very closed off from the time that they were in the war, because they had done their best to bury it. But one guy ended up opening up to me, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But ever since I was young, I loved hearing stories. Great, this senior project, I just wanted to hear the veterans' stories, and then I'm going to compile it in a book, because I enjoy writing and I enjoy history. Great, this will go nicely. But I learned that they didn't want to sit down, so I had 5 or 6 vets back out. Like, uh-oh, what am I going to do? So I had to improvise, and my project ended up kind of evolving over the course of the year, because I had started this back in the first quarter, just probably 2 weeks after it was assigned. So this has been a very long process, but I've enjoyed it. So since I couldn't get the veterans to sit down with me and talk to me about what it was like to be in World War II, okay, fine, I'll go get experience myself. So one of the places I went was the USS Midway, having been commissioned in 1943, but it was built as a World War II aircraft carrier, the first of the Midway class of carrier. But however, it was commissioned in 1945, 1 week after the war ended in Japan. So it never saw combat in World War II, but it later served throughout Korea and Vietnam. And then this is what it looks like today, having its twin flight path upgrade. We stole that from the British. So that's one thing I learned. Another thing was I went to the Planes of Fame Air Museum in Chino. I had gone with the hopes of meeting a veteran down there who I heard worked on some of the planes. However, I never met him in all my time going there. But I did become a certified volunteer. So to start out, the volunteers get to clean the planes. So I thought, wow, this is a good way to learn more about these aircraft. So the aircraft I chose to really put a lot of time and energy into was a Me-109, which was one of the Nazis' most famous fighter planes from the era. So I got to, having been shot down in Russia, it sat at the bottom of a lake until 2003. You can still see the original paint colors on it and the different layers of paint because it was freshwater in a very cold climate where the lake froze over for much of the year. So this plane was very well preserved, and this particular plane fought in the Battle of France, Battle of Britain, and it was later sent over to Russia where it was shot down. but I learned a lot about what it would have been like for a pilot to have been inside of the aircraft. Then when it came time to write this project, I sat down 2 weeks ago. Oh boy, now here's the part that I'm kind of dreading because I've learned so much. How can I possibly put it all down? I ended up writing for about 7 days, trying to take the whole thing on at once, all 4 chapters, which didn't turn out so well. I ended up scrapping that, taking the main ideas and starting over. So this finished product, which is 13,000 words, I wrote in the past 7 days, which was quite, yeah, that was an event. But, so in some of my free time, which I didn't have, I looked up memes about writer's block because that was something that I definitely struggled with throughout the time. Okay, I have this idea and I need to go to another idea, but how do I connect it? I don't know. Okay, well, what am I going to talk about now? Okay, so writer's block. And then something else that one of the main sources that I used was a book written by Tom Brokaw called The Greatest Generation. And in this book, there were, I think he talks about 10 different families that served on both the home front and the war front, and how the greatest generation, why they were the greatest generation, how they stepped up to the plate and looked at their duty straight head on and accepted it and moved on with it. It was interesting because their parents fought or their fathers would all have fought in World War I if they had enlisted or were drafted. So they grew up in the mindset of war, and a world war is a possibility. Then they went into the Great Depression, in which their families lost everything. So they were used to having limited amounts of supplies. And then once economic hope was on the horizon, then we were bombed by Japan, thrusting us into the war. So there wasn't, this wouldn't have been too outside of the ordinary for them, which was one of the reasons why they were so great. Now onto the veterans. These were the main reason why I did this whole project. This is Herbert Strickland, and he was an Army Corps engineer who was flown to Pearl Harbor 1 week after it was bombed to help repair it. And then he was later he did 3 landings in New Guinea, he went to the Marshall Islands and the Philippines. He was very funny. And then this was Ed, everyone called him Doc. He was from Easy Company, and he served in North Africa where most of the 101st served before being sent up to Normandy. Then he was sent up to Normandy, jumped out with everyone, later earning himself a Bronze Star that night and a Purple Heart. So both of them are still alive and well, and so they're very, very funny people. So this is kind of the finished product, what it looks like, and I have one right there, and then there will be a couple that you can see afterwards. So the chapters I worked on were, number 1, I just want to listen. So this chapter kind of embodied all of my past with leading up to this project and why I wanted to do it, and then what I tried to do with the veterans and why that didn't work. And then chapter 2 is why is war necessary? Well, this chapter gave me a big headache, but it was super interesting nonetheless, because I ended up going back to Aristotle. I went to the Code of Hammurabi, Aristotle, Mayflower Compact, Constitution, Declaration, Independence, and to look at, well, what is the telos of a human? Why is human life and human rights so important to go to war for? So the one sentence answer is, well, just war is necessary in order to defend the inherent rights of man. So, and then chapter 3, doing their duty. This was the chapter on the World War II veterans and why they became the greatest generation. And then conclusion, summing everything up, tying it in together, and afterwards, just why I wrote it. So anyone who wants a copy, I can send you a PDF. But yeah, and that's all. So thank you very much. Going once, twice.
How'd you,
So, I'm sorry.
so how'd you find contacting the veterans? How did you, what was your method to get a hold of
I first tried the VFW post in Data Point and around, but they never got back to me. I called multiple times, still no response. So, well, I'll have to expand my search. So I ended up calling probably 24 rest homes around. Hi, do you have any World War II veterans that would be willing to let me interview them or just talk to them? So I ended up finding a couple, and they all ended up backing out at the last minute, so, which is understandable. But I ended up meeting with Herbert Strickland.
Cool.
How? Like, how did you meet?
How? Well, I called the restaurant in San Juan, and they said, yes, we have a veteran, and I think he'd be willing to have you talk to him. So let me check. They checked, called me back. Yes, you can come in. What are some good dates for you? And then went from there. Yeah,
Just
questions?
wondering about your project, what you remember, or what's more to you, or what was it with you?
So I'm not quite sure.
Like, what, is there anything that impacted you that you'll carry, you know, on?
Oh. Definitely, I definitely have a better understanding of war and why it's necessary, and then it gave me a deeper understanding and gratitude for what the Founding Fathers did and set up and why America is so great and so important. That's one aspect, and then I really want to be able to live up to the greatest generation, and just, they understood duty and responsibility and embraced it, and that's something that I don't see very often in my generation, and that saddens me. So that's given me a goal. Great, I want to become more responsible, and I want to understand my duty and be able to do it with a willing heart.